Park, Taeho stood at the center of the Galactic Concord Assembly and waited for the room to stop laughing. It was not real laughter, not the kind that came from joy. It was the polite, practiced sound that powerful beings made when they wanted someone to feel small. The chamber was enormous, built from pale stone that hummed with a faint blue light, and every seat was filled with delegates from 34 species, each one older than humanity, each one richer, each one absolutely certain that the man standing at the podium had nothing important to say. Taeho smiled. He had a good smile, warm, open, the kind of smile that made people trust him. He had practiced it for years, not because it was fake, but because a smile was a tool, and Taeho believed in using every tool he had. "Honored delegates," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "I stand before you once again to request that the Drakari Dominion face formal consequences for the unprovoked military assault on Earth's outer colonies 12 years ago. 20 million human beings were killed. Families, children, workers who had no weapons and no warning." He paused and looked around the room. Some delegates looked bored. Some looked uncomfortable. The Drakari section, a block of massive reptilian figures in dark armor, stared at him with open contempt. Valeth, the High Arbiter of the Concord, shifted in her elevated seat. She was Tesserine, a tall being made of something that looked like living crystal, her body catching the light and throwing pale rainbows across the walls. She had led the Concord for 400 years, and she spoke with the slow, heavy patience of someone who believed time always proved her right. "Ambassador Park," Valeth said, "the Concord has reviewed your petition. As with previous submissions, we find that the matter falls within the scope of bilateral resolution. We encourage humanity and the Drakari Dominion to pursue direct negotiations. Direct negotiations with the species that had burned human cities from orbit." Taeho kept his smile in place. "I understand, Arbiter. Thank you for your time." He bowed, turned, and walked out of the chamber. His footsteps echoed in the long corridor. When he was alone, he pulled out a small device and typed a single message in a code that no alien system could read, because it was based on an old Korean card game that only 7 people in the universe knew how to play. The message said, "They said no, again." He sent it to Earth. Then he put the device away and kept walking. Deep beneath the mountains of Gangwon Province, in a room that did not exist on any map, Han Do-hun read the message aloud. The room was plain, concrete walls, a single table, no windows, no signals, no recording devices. The only light came from a low lamp that made everyone's face look sharp and tired. 5 people sat around the table, and every one of them had been waiting for this message, not with hope, but with confirmation. Do-hun was a man who did not look like a weapon. He was 53, slim, with reading glasses, and the quiet manner of someone who had spent most of his life in university lecture halls. Before the incursion, he had been a history professor. He taught students about ancient wars, about empires that rose and fell, about the patterns that repeated across centuries. After 20 million people died, the government had come to him and asked a simple question. "You study how wars are won. Can you win one for us?" He had said yes. That was 12 years ago. He had not raised his voice since. "They said no," Do-hun repeated. He folded the message and set it on the table. "Then we proceed." No one asked questions. They had all known this was coming. Yoon Nari sat to his left. She was 41, sharp-faced, with eyes that noticed everything, and a mind that forgot nothing. She had spent the last decade building the most advanced intelligence network humanity had ever created. And she had done it while the galaxy thought humans were too loud and too stupid to keep secrets. She had designed the plan they were about to execute. She called it the Blackout Protocol. "The network is ready," Nari said. "Every transmitter, every relay, every signal source. One command and it all goes dark. Simultaneously. No gaps, no echoes, no leaks. Dohan nodded. Bei Jinu leaned forward. He was the youngest at the table, 36, with messy hair and the permanently red eyes of a man who slept 3 hours a night and considered that generous. He was the chief engineer of Project Voidstep, and for the past 8 years, he had been building a secret fleet of warships inside hollowed-out asteroids in the Kuiper Belt, at the frozen edge of the solar system. 200 ships, Jinu said, and despite everything, he was grinning. All armed, all fitted with the spatial folding drives. They work, Dohan. I tested the last batch myself. He tapped the table. They hit us with a hammer. We built a scalpel. Kwam Suha said nothing. She sat at the end of the table with her arms crossed, a tall woman with short hair, and a scar that ran from her left ear to her jaw. She was the captain of the flagship, the ESS Silent Drum, and she would lead the fleet when the time came. She had lost her mother, her brother, and her 2 young nephews in the incursion. She had spent 12 years turning grief into discipline, and discipline into something that the Drakari would eventually learn to call a mistake. Cho Unji, the last at the table, was 29 and looked even younger. She was a xenolinguist and communications expert, the person who understood how the galaxy talked, and more importantly, how it listened. She had figured out something that no alien species had ever considered possible. She had figured out how to make an entire planet go perfectly, completely silent. When we flip the switch, Unji said, they won't just lose our signals. They'll lose our background noise, the electromagnetic hum that Earth has been leaking since the first radio broadcast. We're going to become a hole in the galaxy, a place where sound goes to die. She paused. It's going to terrify them. Dohan looked at each of them in turn, a spy, an engineer, a soldier, a linguist, and himself, a man who had read enough history to know that the most dangerous moment in any conflict was not the battle. It was the silence before it. 6 months, he said. We continue as normal. We trade. We broadcast. We laugh. We argue. We send them our music and our television shows and our noise. We give them every reason to believe we are exactly what they think we are. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. And then, on a day of my choosing, we go quiet, and we let them sit in that silence until they understand what it means. He put his glasses back on. Any questions? There were none. That same evening, halfway across the galaxy, a small insectoid being named Illis sat in a dark room filled with glowing screens and stared at a graph that no one else would have found interesting. Illis was a Fenri, a species known for obsessive pattern recognition, and she had spent the last 20 years studying humanity for the Concord's intelligence division. She tracked their communications, their cultural output, their trade patterns, their diplomatic language. And something was wrong. It was subtle, so subtle that no algorithm had caught it. But Illis did not rely on algorithms. She relied on instinct, on the feeling that came when a pattern shifted by a single degree. Over the past year, Earth's diplomatic language had become more polite. Not friendlier, polite. There was a difference. Friendly meant warmth. Polite meant distance. Polite meant someone was being careful with their words, because their words no longer mattered. At the same time, human cultural exports had increased. More music, more shows, more noise than ever before. It was as if humanity was deliberately turning up the volume. Illis wrote a report. She flagged it as high priority. It said, hypothesis, humanity is using increased cultural output to mask a significant behavioral shift. Recommend immediate investigation. Her superior read the report, marked it as low priority, and filed it away. Humans were loud. That was simply what they were. There was nothing to worry about. Yillis sat in her dark room and felt, for the first time in her career, afraid of a species she had spent 2 decades studying. She did not know what was coming, but she knew, with the certainty of someone who had watched the pattern break, that something was. On Luna, Quan Suha stood before a wall of names, 20 million names, carved into black stone, stretching across a memorial that covered 3 kilometers of the lunar surface. She came here every month. She always visited the same section. She read every name, one by one, moving her lips without sound. When she finished, she placed her hand flat against the cold stone and whispered, "Soon." Then she turned and walked back to her ship, and the silence of the moon swallowed her footsteps whole. Zhou Unji sat alone in the master communications room and watched the clock count down to 0. The room was buried 300 meters underground, wrapped in layers of steel and stone and signal-dampening material so dense that not even light from the surface could reach it. 12 screens floated in front of her, each one showing a different feed. News broadcasts, music streams, comedy shows, a cooking competition that had somehow become the most popular program on 9 alien worlds. The sound of humanity, loud and alive and wonderfully messy, filled the room like a heartbeat. Unji had helped build the system that would stop it all. She understood better than anyone what silence meant to the galaxy. For 300 years, Earth had been the noisiest planet in known space. Every argument, every love song, every stupid late-night broadcast had leaked into the void, and the galaxy had listened the way a person might listen to a neighbor's loud party. With annoyance, with amusement, with the comfortable certainty that they knew exactly what was happening on the other side of the wall. Today, the party was going to stop. The final broadcast was already airing. A comedy show called Last Laugh, beloved by millions of humans, and strangely by an even larger alien audience that found human humor fascinating and bizarre. The host was telling a joke about a cat. Somewhere on a space station 12 light-years away, a Tesserine diplomat was watching it, and making the low chiming sound that passed for laughter among their kind. The clock hit 0. Unji pressed a single key, and Earth went silent. It did not happen gradually. There was no fade, no stutter, no warning. One moment the galaxy was full of humanity's noise. The next moment, there was nothing. Every transmitter on Earth, on Luna, on Mars, on every station and colony and ship in human space, shut down at exactly the same instant. Radio signals, digital broadcasts, subspace relays, quantum communication links, all of it, gone. Even the faint background hum of electromagnetic radiation that Earth had been leaking since the first radio towers were built over 400 years ago simply ceased to exist. For the first time since humanity discovered electricity, the planet was electromagnetically invisible. Unji sat in the sudden quiet and let out a long breath. The screens in front of her were dark now. The room was silent. She could hear her own heartbeat. "Now they'll listen," she whispered. Across the galaxy, the reaction was immediate. On the Concorde Central Station, communication officers noticed the dropout within seconds. Earth's feeds had vanished from every channel simultaneously. At first they assumed it was a technical failure, a relay malfunction, something simple and fixable. They ran diagnostics. They pinged every known human frequency. Not static. Not interference. Nothing. Just a clean, empty void where an entire civilization's voice used to be. Within an hour, the confusion had turned to concern. Within 6 hours, it had turned to fear. Valeth convened an emergency session of the Concorde Assembly. The chamber was only half full, because many delegates were still trying to contact their own sources in human space and getting nothing back. Those who were present spoke over each other in a way that Valeth had not permitted in decades. But she did not stop them, because she could see the same question in every face, on every screen, in every trembling voice. What happened to the humans? Theories flew across the chamber. A natural disaster, a plague, a civil war, a technological collapse, an asteroid impact. Someone suggested that humanity had accidentally destroyed itself with its own weapons. And for a brief moment, several delegates seemed almost relieved by the idea. Better a dead humanity than a silent one, because a dead humanity made sense. A silent humanity did not. Goron, the military primus of the Drakari Dominion, was not at the assembly. He was in his personal war room aboard his command ship, sitting in a chair built for a being twice the size of any human, staring at a star map where Earth's signal markers had been replaced by empty black space. His aide, a young officer with polished green scales, brought him updates every 30 minutes. No human signals detected. No human ships moving. No human activity of any kind. The aide reported each update with professional calm, but Goron could smell the fear on him. Drakari had excellent noses, and fears smelled like copper. Goron said nothing for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to the archive terminal in the corner of the room. He entered his command codes and opened a file he had compiled himself, years ago, in secret, because he was the only Drakari military leader who believed that understanding your enemy was more important than outnumbering them. The file was titled Human Military History, a Study. He opened it and began to read. He read about a place called Normandy, where an army of humans had crossed a freezing ocean in darkness and complete radio silence to attack a fortified coastline. He read about something called the Manhattan Project, where an entire nation had built a weapon of unimaginable power in absolute secrecy, while fighting a war on two fronts. He read about a general named Hannibal, who had marched war elephants over mountains because no one believed it was possible, and about an empire called the Mongols that had conquered half a planet by being faster, quieter, and more ruthless than anyone thought they could be. He read for hours. When he finished, he closed the file and sat very still. His aide came in with another update. Still no signals from Earth. "Pull back the fleet," Goron said. His aide blinked. "Sir? Every ship, pull them back to the inner territories, now." "Primus, may I ask why?" Goron looked at the dark spot on his star map, where Earth used to glow with 1,000 signals, and said, "Because I have read what humans do to people who hurt them, and we hurt them very badly." His aide opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He had never seen the Primus afraid before. He left to relay the orders. On the Concorde's intelligence station, Illis was running. Her small insectoid legs carried her through corridors at a speed that made other beings jump out of her way. She burst into the Security Council's briefing room, carrying a data tablet filled with charts and projections that she had been building for 20 years, and she slammed it onto the table with a force that cracked the screen. "Listen to me," she said. "I know what this is." The council members stared at her, and Fenri analysts did not have the authority to demand their attention. But Yillis was beyond caring about authority. "This is not a collapse," she said. "This is not a disaster. Earth is intact. I have confirmed this through passive observation. Their cities are lit. Their orbital stations are in position. Their ships are docked. Everything is exactly where it should be. The only thing missing is their voice." She pulled up her behavioral models. "I have studied human patterns for 2 decades. Every time this species has launched a major military operation, the same thing happens first. They go quiet. They went quiet before Normandy. They went quiet before their nuclear strikes. They went quiet before every surgical operation in their history. Silence is not a symptom of weakness for humans. It is a symptom of decision." She looked around the room. When humans go quiet, it means they have already decided what they are going to do. They have already chosen their targets. They have already made their plans. The silence is not the event. It is the countdown. The council exchanged glances. One member leaned forward. "What do you recommend?" "Full defensive mobilization, immediately. and a direct diplomatic approach, not through the Concord channels, directly to human leadership. Apologize for the incursion. Offer reparations. Do whatever it takes to make them start talking again, because every hour they are silent, we are closer to whatever they are planning. Valith, who had been listening through a remote feed, spoke into the room. Analyst Yillis, your concern is noted, but you are projecting primitive behavioral patterns onto a civilized member species. Humanity is chaotic and emotional. If they were capable of this level of coordinated action, we would have seen evidence of it long before now. Yillis stared at the screen, where Valith's crystalline face shimmered. Arbiter, she said slowly, the fact that we saw no evidence is the most terrifying part. The council dismissed her. On Earth, in the underground command center, Han Do-hun sat in his chair and watched the galaxy panic. Nari stood beside him, feeding him reports from their intelligence network, the same network that was still listening to every alien communication channel, even though Earth itself was broadcasting nothing. The irony was perfect. The galaxy thought humanity was deaf and mute. In reality, humanity had simply stopped talking. It had never stopped listening. The Drakkari are pulling back their fleet, Nari reported. Goran's order. He's moving them to defensive positions around their home systems. Smart, Do-hun said. He's the only one who did his homework. The Concord is fracturing. 14 emergency sessions in 6 hours. No consensus on anything. Good. Illis tried to warn them. Do-hun raised an eyebrow. The Fenri analyst? What did she say? Everything. She told them exactly what we're doing. And? They ignored her. Do-hun almost smiled. Almost. That's the thing about the truth, he said quietly. People only believe it when they're ready. And by the time they're ready, it's usually too late. Nari waited. Then she asked, how much longer? Do-hun looked at the clock on the wall. 3 days into the silence. The galaxy was afraid, but not yet desperate. Fear was useful, but only when it was given time to grow. Too little, and they would rationalize it away. Too much, and they would do something stupid. The timing had to be perfect. 3 more days, he said. Let the silence do its work. Nari nodded and went back to her screens. In orbit around Earth, 3 Concord probe ships drifted through the darkness of the Sol system, scanning everything and finding nothing wrong. Earth was beautiful from orbit, blue and green and white, shining in the light of its yellow star. Cities glittered on the night side. Ships sat quietly in their docks. Everything looked peaceful. Everything looked normal, except there was no sound. No signals, no broadcasts, no hum, just a planet sitting in perfect absolute silence, like a held breath. The probe captain, a being with 4 arms and skin like gray leather, transmitted a single report back to the Concord. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. They are not dead, they are not broken, they are just waiting. The report reached the Concord assembly 3 hours later. No one laughed at humanity that day. No one laughed at humanity for a very long time after that. On the 7th day of the silence, Earth spoke again, but it did not shout. It whispered, and the whisper was worse than anything the galaxy had imagined. Valith was alone in her private chamber when the message arrived. The chamber was sealed, shielded, and encrypted with tesserine technology that was older than most civilizations. Only 3 beings in the entire galaxy knew the frequency that could reach her here. She had used this channel perhaps a dozen times in 4 centuries, always for matters of absolute secrecy. The console chimed. Valith stared at it. The chime came again. She reached out with one long crystalline arm and opened the transmission. It was text, written in perfect tesserine formal script, the kind that took decades of study to master. No alien species had ever used it correctly. Until now. The message read, Arbiter Valith, we know about the Pact of Reth. We know what the Drakari were promised in exchange for the Concord looking the other way during the incursion on our colonies. We know the names. We know the dates. We know the exact language of the agreement. We have always known. Humanity. Valith's body cracked. Not a large crack. A thin line that ran from her shoulder to her wrist. A stress fracture in her crystalline form that happened only under extreme emotional pressure. It was a fear response that no Tesserine had displayed in over 300 years. She stood in her sealed chamber, her arm fractured, her light dimming, and she read the message again. They have always known. That same hour, across the galaxy, similar messages arrived on private channels, secure frequencies, and encrypted systems that should have been impossible to breach. Every species in the Concord received one. Every message was different. Every message was personal. And every message ended the same way. The Vareth Collective, a species that had secretly been developing biological weapons in violation of Concord law, received a message containing the exact chemical formulas of their 3 most classified projects. The Orath Federation, a trade empire that had quietly sold the coordinates of human outer colonies to the Drakari before the incursion, received a complete list of every transaction, including dates, amounts, and the names of the officials who had authorized them. The Tesserine government's darkest secret, the Pact of Reth, was laid bare in precise legal language. Every message ended with 4 words: "We have always known." In the command center beneath Gangwon province, Yoon Nari stood before a wall of screens showing real-time reactions from across the galaxy, and allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. This was her work. The Blackout Protocol had been the hammer for the past decade, while the galaxy had laughed at humanity's loudness and chaos. Nari had built the most extensive intelligence network in the history of known space. She had recruited agents, planted listening devices, developed code-breaking systems, and exploited a simple truth that no alien species had ever considered. Humanity's noise was a 2-way door. Every entertainment feed that Earth broadcast carried hidden receivers. Every cultural exchange program included intelligence operatives. Every diplomatic channel that the galaxy thought was a one-way window into human chaos was actually a mirror. While the aliens watched humanity's loud, messy, emotional broadcasts and congratulated themselves on how well they understood these simple creatures, humanity was watching them right back. 90 years, Nari said to Dohun, who sat quietly at the table with his hands folded. 90 years of membership in the Concord. 90 years of them treating us like children. And for every single one of those years, we were listening. Dohun nodded. How are they responding? Exactly as predicted. Panic, accusation, fracture. And fracture it was. The Concord Assembly, which had stood unified for over 6 centuries, began to tear itself apart within hours of the messages arriving. Emergency sessions that were supposed to address the human situation devolved into shouting matches as species confronted each other with the secrets that had just been exposed. The Orath ambassador demanded to know how the Concord had allowed biological weapons research on Vireth stations. The Vireth delegates screamed that at least they had not sold innocent civilians to be slaughtered. Valith tried to call for order, but the moment she spoke, 12 delegates demanded her resignation over the Pact of Reth. Within 48 hours, 3 species formally withdrew from the Concord. 5 more suspended their participation. The greatest alliance in galactic history was eating itself alive, and humanity had not fired a single weapon. Cho Unji watched the chaos from her communication station and marveled at the elegance of it. She had spent years studying how alien species communicated, how they kept secrets, how they built trust. And she had learned that trust in the Concord was not built on honesty. It was built on the comfortable assumption that everyone's secrets were safe. Humanity had just proven that no secret was safe. Not anymore. And the beautiful, terrible thing was that they had not even needed to make threats. The information itself was the weapon. Every species was now looking at every other species and wondering what else the humans knew. What other secrets might be released? What other lies might be exposed? The silence had created fear. The whisper had created chaos. They thought our noise meant we were careless, Unji said to Nari. They assumed that a species loud enough to broadcast its arguments to the stars couldn't possibly be smart enough to listen to theirs. Nari allowed herself a thin smile. Assumptions are expensive. On his command ship, Goron received his message. It was shorter than the others, more direct, written in a simplified form of the Drakari military language that even a common soldier could understand. It contained a list of names, 47 names. Every Drakari officer who had planned, authorized, or executed the first incursion against Earth's colonies. Next to each name was a current location, updated within the last 6 hours. At the bottom, a single line. We are coming for them. Only them. Stay out of our way, and this ends clean. Goron read the list 3 times. He recognized every name. Some were his political allies. More were his political enemies. All of them were guilty. He had known they were guilty for 12 years, and he had done nothing about it, because the Concord had told him the matter was closed, and because the Drakari political system rewarded power, not justice. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he opened a channel to every fleet commander in Drakari space. New standing order, he said, effective immediately. No Drakari vessel is to engage, approach, or interfere with any human ship under any circumstances. Any commander who violates this order will answer to me personally. Confirm. One by one the confirmations came in. One commander, a young officer with more pride than sense, asked why. Because the humans are coming, Goron said, and they are not coming for us. They are coming for the ones who deserve it. Our job is to stand aside and let them work. And if we don't stand aside, then they will come for us too. And we will not survive it, the commander confirmed. On the 10th day of the silence, Park Taeho walked back into the Concord Assembly. The chamber, which had been in continuous emergency session for 3 days, fell completely silent the moment he appeared. He walked slowly down the central aisle, his shoes clicking against the stone floor, his face calm, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no symbols of office, just a man walking into a room full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, alone. Every eye, every sensor, every instrument in the chamber was fixed on him. He stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone with a slow, deliberate movement that somehow made the entire room hold its breath. He looked out at the delegates, at the empty seats where withdrawn species used to sit, at Valeth, whose cracked arm she had not been able to repair, at the Drakari section, which was now occupied by a single low-ranking diplomat, because Goron had recalled everyone else. Taeho spoke. His voice was quiet, steady, and absolutely without anger. 12 years ago, 20 million of our people were killed. We came to this assembly and asked for justice. You said no. We came back and asked again. You said no. We came back every year for 12 years, and every year you said no. He paused. We tried asking. You said no. Another pause, longer this time. The silence in the chamber was so deep that delegates could hear each other breathing. We are no longer asking. He turned and walked out of the chamber. No one stopped him. No one spoke. No one moved. The doors closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. The chamber remained silent for 11 minutes. It was the longest silence in the 600-year history of the Galactic Concord Assembly. And in that silence, every delegate understood, with perfect and terrible clarity, that the galaxy they had known was already gone. Back on her intelligence station, Illis watched the recording of Tejo's speech 17 times. On the 18th viewing, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. When Tejo had walked out, he had not gone back to his diplomatic ship. The tracking systems showed that he had boarded a small, unmarked vessel that had appeared in the station's docking bay without any arrival record, without any transponder signal, without any indication that it existed at all. It was a ghost ship, human-made, and it had been sitting in the heart of the Concorde's most secure station for who knew how long, invisible and silent, waiting for its passenger. Illis closed the recording and sat in the dark. She had spent 20 years studying humanity. She had warned the Concorde. She had begged them to listen. They had ignored her. And now, sitting alone in the dark, with the knowledge that human ghost ships could apparently dock anywhere in the galaxy without being detected, she understood something that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to grasp. The humans had not been the noisy, chaotic children the galaxy believed them to be. They had never been children at all. They had been something far more dangerous. They had been patient. And now their patience was over. The fleet woke up like ghosts rising from their graves. In the frozen darkness at the edge of the solar system, 200 asteroids cracked open, and 200 warships emerged into the void. They were black, sleek, and completely silent, running without transponders, without navigation beacons, without a single photon of wasted light. Against the darkness of deep space, they were invisible. Against the cold of the Kuiper Belt, they were indistinguishable from the ice and rock around them. They had been sleeping here for years, waiting inside their stone shells like seeds waiting for spring. Bei Jinu stood in the engineering bay of the ESS Silent Drum and watched his children come to life. That was how he thought of them. He had designed every hull, every engine, every weapon system. He had spent 8 years in the asteroid fields, breathing recycled air and eating terrible food, building the fleet that no one in the galaxy knew existed. He was exhausted in a way that went deeper than bones. But as the 200 signals appeared on his screen, each one green, each one alive, each one ready, he felt something close to peace. "All ships reporting operational," he said into his communicator. "Fleet is awake." On the bridge of the Silent Drum, Quan Suha took the command chair. The bridge was not like the bridges of alien warships, which tended to be vast, ornate, and designed to impress. The Silent Drum's bridge was small, efficient, and built for one purpose. Every surface was matte black. Every screen showed tactical data. There were no windows, because windows were a weakness. Suha saw the universe through sensors and numbers, and that was exactly how she preferred it. She opened a fleet-wide channel, audio only, no video. Even now, in the moment before everything changed, the tradition of silence held. "All ships, this is Suha." Her voice was steady and low. "You know what they took from us. You know why we're here. Today we take it back. No mercy for the guilty, no harm to the innocent. Execute your mission, and make me proud." 200 ships acknowledged. 200 crews, each one a volunteer, each one carrying the memory of 20 million dead, prepared for war. "Void step in 60 seconds, Suha said. "All ships, fold on my mark." Bei Jinu's greatest achievement was not the ships themselves, it was what they could do. The Galactic Concorde's fastest vessels used subspace drives that could cross a star system in a matter of minutes. Human ships could do it in 3 seconds. Jinu called the technology Void Step. It worked by folding space, pinching 2 distant points together, and sliding a ship through the crease like a needle through fabric. The Concorde scientists had theorized about spatial folding for centuries, and concluded it was impossible. Jinu had built it in a cave, with stolen alien wreckage and human stubbornness. Because he was an engineer, and engineers did not care about what was theoretically impossible. They only cared about what worked. "Mark," Suha said. The fleet folded. 200 ships vanished from the Kuiper Belt and appeared, 3 seconds later, in orbit around the Drakari military station 600 light-years from Earth. The station's sensors did not even have time to register the anomaly. One moment, the space around the station was empty. The next, it was filled with black warships that had materialized like shadows given form. The station's commander, a veteran Drakari officer who had served for 40 years, saw the fleet appear on his tactical display and experienced something he had never felt before in his life: pure, paralyzing terror. The battle lasted 90 seconds. Human weapons were not elegant, they were not graceful. They were the weapons of a species that had spent its entire history at war with itself, and had therefore become very, very good at destruction. The station's shields collapsed in 12 seconds. Its weapons were disabled in 30. Its hull was breached in 60. By 90 seconds, the station was an expanding cloud of debris, glittering in the light of a distant star. No civilian structures were hit. No nearby ships were targeted. The strike was surgical, precise, and absolute. Over the next 3 days, the fleet moved through Drakari space like a knife through water. 14 targets, 14 military installations, each one directly connected to the planning or execution of the first incursion. The fleet would appear, strike, and vanish before any response could be organized. By the time Drakari reinforcements arrived at one target, the humans were already destroying the next. Suha commanded the operation from the silent drum with a focus that bordered on mechanical. She did not shout. She did not celebrate. She gave orders in the same quiet, measured tone she used for everything, and her crew followed them with the precision of people who had trained for this moment every day for years. At the fourth target, a Drakari station commander surrendered the moment the human fleet appeared. He opened every channel and begged for mercy. Suha checked his name against the incursion roster, the list of 47 names that humanity had compiled over 12 years of intelligence work. He was not on it. "Surrender accepted," Suha said. "Evacuate all personnel. You have 10 minutes." The station was emptied, and then destroyed. Every piece of military hardware was reduced to atoms. The people were untouched. At the 9th target, another commander tried to surrender. Suha checked his name. He was on the list. He had personally authorized the orbital bombardment of a human colony called New Busan, killing 600,000 people, most of them in the first 30 seconds. "Surrender was available 12 years ago," Suha told him. "When our people begged for their lives, your ships kept firing. Your window has closed." The station was destroyed with everyone aboard. Across the galaxy, the Concorde watched it happen. Not through human broadcasts, because Earth was still silent, but through their own sensor networks and intelligence channels. They saw the impossible speed of the human fleet. They saw the precision of the strikes. They saw the terrifying 3-second fold that allowed human ships to appear anywhere, at any time, without warning. Valith called for a unified military response. Her message went out to every Concorde member species, demanding a combined fleet to stop humanity's aggression. The response was silence. No one answered. Half the member species were secretly relieved that the Drakari were being punished for the incursion. The other half were terrified that their own secrets, the ones humanity had already revealed in the whisper, would be used against them next. Uis, watching from her station, broadcast an open analysis to anyone who would listen. "Human military doctrine," she said, her voice calm despite the tremor in her legs, "has always been built on one principle: disproportionate, decisive response. They do not match force with force. They do not seek balance. They answer a slap with total destruction of the hand that slapped them. This is not rage. This is not emotion. This is calculated doctrine built on thousands of years of warfare experience. And it is already over." Anything we do now will only make things worse. No one argued with her this time. On the 14th day, the fleet reached the final target, Drakari High Command, a massive fortress station in the heart of the Drakari home system, bristling with weapons, surrounded by defense platforms, and carrying the most powerful shields in Drakari space. It was where the incursion had been planned. It was where the order to burn human colonies had been signed. It was the source. Suha's fleet surrounded it. 200 ships, arranged in a perfect sphere, their weapons charged and ready. Inside the fortress, the remaining architects of the incursion were gathered, the officers and politicians who had planned and approved the killing of 20 million humans. They had retreated here because it was the most defended position in their territory. They believed it would protect them. Then, for the first time since the blackout began, Earth spoke. Not through a broadcast, through a single directed transmission aimed at the fortress station and nothing else. The voice was Han De-hoon's, speaking from the command center beneath Gangwon province. His voice was calm, quiet, and almost gentle, like a teacher explaining something simple to a student who had failed to understand. This message is for the commanders of the Drakari military installation designated High Command, he said. I am speaking your names now, so there is no confusion about who this is for. He read 47 names, slowly, clearly, each one pronounced correctly, because Cho Eun-ji had taught him the Drakari pronunciation herself. 12 years ago, you killed 20 million of our people. Children, families, people who had done nothing to you and posed no threat to your civilization. You did this because you believed we were weak. You believed our noise meant we were foolish. You believed our kindness meant we could not be cruel. A pause. The silence stretched across space itself. You were wrong about all of it. Another pause. Suha, finish it. Kwan Suha stood on the bridge of the silent drum, looking at the tactical display showing the fortress station. She thought about her mother. She thought about her brother. She thought about her two nephews, who had been 7 and 9 years old when the sky above their colony turned to fire. All ships, she said. Fire. 200 ships fired simultaneously. The fortress station's shields held for 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than anything else the fleet had encountered. Then, they collapsed. The station was consumed in a storm of energy, so intense that it briefly outshone the system's sun. When the light faded, there was nothing left. Not wreckage. Not atoms. The space where the fortress had been was simply empty. Suha stood on the bridge and stared at the empty space. Behind her, the crew was silent. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The weight of what they had done, what they had needed to do, hung over them like a second gravity. Bei Jinu appeared at the bridge door. He looked at Suha with tired eyes. Do you feel better? He asked. Suha shook her head slowly. No, but I feel finished, and that's enough. She turned back to the tactical display and opened a channel to the fleet. All ships, operation complete, set course for home. 200 ships folded space and vanished. The Drakari home system was left in silence, the same kind of silence that Earth had imposed on the galaxy 2 weeks ago. But this silence was different. This was not the silence of patience. This was the silence of aftermath. The silence of a lesson taught so thoroughly that it would never need to be repeated. Or so humanity hoped. Cho Eun-ji sat in front of the master communications array and placed her fingers on the keys. The room was the same one where she had silenced the planet 2 weeks ago. Same concrete walls, same low light, same absolute stillness. But everything was different now. The fleet was home. The operation was over. The 47 names on the list had been crossed off, permanently. And the galaxy had learned something about humanity that it would never forget. Now it was time to be loud again. Unji had thought carefully about what the first broadcast should be. The obvious choice was a speech, a declaration of victory, a statement from Dohun or Teho, something powerful and political. But Unji understood something about the galaxy that most people did not. The aliens had not feared humanity because of speeches. They had feared the silence, and the best way to signal that the silence was over, truly over, was not to say something important. It was to say something human. She had chosen a song, an old Korean folk melody, about the sea after a storm. It was simple and beautiful, and had no words, just a gentle melody, played on a wooden flute. The kind of thing a grandmother might hum while watching the waves come in, on a quiet evening. Unji pressed the key. The song went out across every frequency, every relay, every channel that had been dark for 2 weeks. It spread through human space at the speed of light, and then faster, carried by subspace relays to every corner of the galaxy. On the Concorde Central Station, a communications officer who had been staring at dead screens for 14 days nearly fell out of her chair when the signal appeared. She listened to the melody for a moment, her 4-fingered hands trembling, and then announced to the station in a voice that cracked with relief, "They're back." Across the galaxy, species heard the music and felt something they could not quite name. It was not fear, though fear was still there, buried deep. It was not joy. It was something like recognition. The noise was back. The humans were loud again. And somehow, despite everything, despite the warships and the destruction and the terrible, patient silence, the first thing they chose to broadcast was a song about the sea. It was the most human thing imaginable, and it was exactly why the galaxy had never truly understood them. Within hours, the broadcasts flooded back. Music, news, arguments, comedy shows. The wonderful, chaotic, overwhelming noise of 8 billion people who had spent 2 weeks in coordinated silence and were now making up for lost time. On a station in the Outer Rim, a group of Tesserine traders turned on a human music channel and sat together listening to it. Not because they liked the music, but because the sound meant the galaxy was safe again. 3 weeks after the silence ended, Valith resigned. She did not make a speech. She did not offer explanations. She simply released a brief statement saying that she was stepping down from the position of High Arbiter after 400 years of service, and that the Concorde would need new leadership for the era ahead. The Pact of Reth had been made public by then, not by humanity, but by Concorde journalists who had pieced together the evidence from the whisper. The truth was undeniable. The Tesserine leadership had known about the planned incursion against human colonies and had allowed it to happen in exchange for Drakari political loyalty. Several Concorde species issued formal apologies to humanity. Others were motivated by the very reasonable fear that humans might go quiet again if they were not treated better. Either way, the apologies came, and with them came something that Park Taeho had been requesting for 12 years. A seat at the table. Taeho returned to the Concorde Assembly, but this time he did not stand at the podium as a petitioner. He sat in a newly created position, the co-architect of the reformed Concorde Charter. The new charter was being written from scratch, and for the first time in 600 years, a human had equal authority in shaping it. An old Concorde delegate, one of the few who had treated Taeho with respect even before the silence, asked him what humanity wanted from the new order. Taeho thought about it for a moment. "What we have always wanted," he said, "a seat at the table, not under it." The delegate nodded slowly. "And if the table doesn't accommodate you?" Taeho smiled his warm, practiced smile. "Then we'll build a new table." Nobody laughed. Nobody was sure if he was joking. On a neutral station in the border region between human and Drakari space, Goron met Quan Suha for the first and only time. The meeting was unofficial. No records, no aides. Just two soldiers sitting across from each other, in a small room with a single light and 2 cups of a drink that neither of them particularly enjoyed. Goron was enormous, even by Drekari standards, his green-black scales scarred from decades of service. Suha was half his size, and looked like she weighed nothing at all. She sat with her hands folded on the table, and her scarred face perfectly still. They sat in silence for a long time. "My people will need a generation to recover from what you did," Goron said finally. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Suha said nothing. "I want you to know something," Goron continued. "When the incursion was voted on, I was the only member of the War Council who voted against it. Not because I cared about human lives at the time, I am honest about that, but because I had studied your history, and I knew that attacking you was the worst mistake my people could make." "I know," Suha said. "You know? We had the full vote record within a year of the incursion. Your vote was noted." She paused. "That is why your fleet was never targeted. That is why you are alive to sit across from me." Goron absorbed this. The room was quiet. "Your species is terrifying," he said. Suha almost smiled. It was the closest she had come to smiling in a very long time. "Only when we have to be." Goron studied her face, this small, scarred human who had commanded a fleet that dismantled the Drekari military in 3 days. He made a low, rumbling sound, the Drekari equivalent of a respectful laugh. "I believe I would like to never be your enemy again." "Good," Suha said. That was the point. On a quiet research station far from any planet, Yillis met Cho Unji. The two sat in Yillis's office, surrounded by screens and data terminals and 20 years' worth of research into human behavior. Yillis was small, even by Fenri standards, her insectoid body covered in a fine dust of shed exoskeleton that she never bothered to clean. Unji sat across from her with her legs crossed and a cup of tea in her hands. "How long?" Yillis asked. "How long were you planning this?" Unji considered the question. The actual planning, about 8 years, but the idea, the understanding that we would need to be ready for something like this, that started the day the first colony burned, 12 years ago. You spent 12 years preparing. We spent 12 years listening. The preparation was just the last part. Then she asked the question that had been eating at her for weeks. The question that no one else in the galaxy had thought to ask. Was it always a cover? The noise? Was every broadcast, every song, every argument just a mask for what you were really doing? Unji set down her tea. She looked at Yillis, this small, brilliant alien who had been the only one in the entire galaxy to see the truth before it was too late. And she felt something like respect. "No," Unji said, "the noise is real. We really are that loud. We really are that messy and emotional and chaotic. We argue about everything. We broadcast our worst moments alongside our best. We are exactly as ridiculous as you always thought we were." She leaned forward. "But here's the thing that the galaxy got wrong about us. You assumed that chaos meant we could not be organized. You assumed that emotion meant we could not be cold. You assumed that noise meant we could not be silent. And those assumptions nearly worked in your favor, because we really are all of those things. We are chaotic and emotional and loud." She paused. "But we are also the species that built pyramids while wearing animal skins. We split the atom while we were still fighting with rifles. We went to our own moon, using less computing power than the device I use to play music. Chaos and strategy are not opposites for us. They never have been. We contain both, and the galaxy made the mistake of only seeing one." Yillis stared at her for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "I tried to warn them." "I know," Unji said. "I read your reports, all of them. You were right about everything." They did not listen. No, they did not. In Seoul on a warm afternoon, Han Dohan walked through a park. Cherry blossoms were falling, catching the light as they drifted down like pink snow. Children ran across the grass, chasing each other, and shouting with the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that only children could produce. A street musician sat on a bench playing guitar, surrounded by a small crowd of people who had stopped to listen. The music drifted through the trees and mixed with the sounds of the city, traffic and conversation and laughter and life. Yoon Nari walked beside Dohun, her hands in her pockets, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. She never stopped scanning. It was the curse of a spy master. "Do you think they will test us again?" she asked. Dohun watched a small girl chasing a pigeon across the path. The pigeon seemed unconcerned. The girl was delighted. "Probably," he said. "Eventually. Someone always does. Memory is short, and the galaxy is large. In 100 years, maybe 200, some species will look at our noise and our mess and our chaos and think the same thing the Drekari thought. They will think we are weak. They will think our kindness is a flaw. And what will we do?" Dohan stopped walking. He looked up at the sky, the same sky that 2 months ago had been broadcasting nothing but silence and intent. The same sky that now carried music and television and the sounds of 8 billion people living their loud, beautiful, chaotic lives. "The same thing we always do," he said. "We will warn them first." A cherry blossom landed on his shoulder. He brushed it off gently. "And if they don't listen?" Dohan smiled. It was a quiet smile, warm and tired and ancient. The smile of a man who had read 10,000 years of human history and understood, better than anyone, the terrible pattern that ran through all of it. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Somewhere behind them, the street musician began a new song. It carried across the park, over the heads of the playing children, past the falling blossoms, and up into the sky, where within hours it would reach a satellite, and from there a relay, and from there the stars. Another drop of noise in humanity's endless ocean of sound, broadcast to a galaxy that was now listening very, very carefully. Earth was loud again, and the galaxy had learned, finally and permanently, that when the noise stopped, the only appropriate response was to run.